In the dry evening wind, a veteran ranger follows two overlapping tracks, a lioness and a wounded wild dog pup. Years ago, he arrived an hour too late and lost a small life. Today, nature asks him to choose again. Step in to save, or stand back and let the wild decide. As poachers draw near and the silence turns heavy as stone, an old scar and a new choice will turn the story on its head. Elias Cole knew the plain by its smells long before the horizon came into focus. Dry grass, iron-rich dust, a hint of acacia sap. He stepped from the truck and felt the afternoon heat rise through the soles of his boots like a warning he had heard many times before. He crouched at the edge of a pale wash where wind had combed the sand to ribbons, and there they were, two sets of prints crossing the same corridor of light. A lioness had passed at dawn. A pup had limped through not long after, small pads dragging, one toe splaying where pain had asked too much of it. He rested his palm above the marks without touching them, as if warmth might still be trapped in the hollows. Years slid back in his mind to the night he arrived 1 hour late to a call he never forgot, to a cub he never could save. In the quiet that followed, something inside him had set like clay. Now, with the wind stirring the grass around his knees, he felt that old shape begin to soften. "Elias, you copy." Nandi's voice came thin over the radio, patient and steady. "We've got chatter on the North Ridge. Could be hunters testing a snare line." "I see fresh sign," he said. "Large female, and a pup." He did not say the word wild dog. He didn't need to. The idea was unlikely enough to make anyone pause. He moved slowly along the seam of the wash, letting the trail lead him instead of trying to command it. Tufts of fur clung to a thorn. A smear of red, already browning, dotted a stone the size of his hand. He lifted his binoculars and scanned the low humps of shrubs ahead. Heat haze wavered, turned the land to water, then back again. Somewhere beyond that shimmer, a life waited on his decision. The radio crackled once more. "Be smart, Elias," Nandi said, softer now. "You're close. I can feel it." He set the glasses down and loosened the strap on his canteen. His hands were not young, but they were steady. He knew the old rule, observe, don't intrude, but he also knew the debt he carried, and how some rules changed when the land itself seemed to ask for a different kind of courage. He took one careful step, then another, into the tall grass. Ahead, hidden by wind and light, a mother stood between the world and something small that should not have been hers to guard. Elias drew a breath, tasted dust and memory, and kept walking. The grass brushed Elias's knees as he eased forward, chin tucked, shoulders narrow, every motion slow enough to let the wind explain him. He stopped 20 paces from the thorns and set his canteen on the ground, then slid a folded bandage beside it. No sudden moves, no direct stare. He kept his hands open, palms down, like a man placing an offering at the edge of a church he did not yet deserve to enter. The lioness rose from the shade as if lifted by the heat itself. Broad-shouldered, scar on her left flank like a crescent of pale moon, she stood between Elias and a small trembling shape tucked into the roots. Her eyes did not blaze. They measured. She rumbled once, a warning more felt than heard, and held her ground. "Mara," he breathed, the name arriving from some distant file in his memory, a record of sightings and seasons. The radio ticked against his chest. "Status?" Nandi asked. "Visual on the lioness," he said. "A pup behind her. She's calm but firm." A new voice joined, smooth and careful. "This is Dr. Seifu, at the station. If the pup is injured, you can help without breaking the spell. Place water within reach. If you must touch anything, do it with the quietest hands you own." Elias nodded, though no one could see it. He nudged the canteen a little closer with 2 fingers, then backed his hand away the way a tide retreats. The pup raised its head, tall ears, muzzle flecked with dust, the right foreleg held tight to its chest. "Easy, little one," Elias said, the words barely more than breath. Mara shifted her weight, not advancing, not retreating. The space between them felt like a chalk line drawn by the sun. Elias took off his knife and laid it on the ground behind him, a small ceremony of trust. He slid one more item forward, gauze wrapped in paper, and watched the pup's eyes follow the movement. "Good," Dr. Seifu said quietly. "Look for swelling or anything wrapped around the limb." Elias edged sideways to change the angle of light. That was when he saw it, a thin loop pressed into the fur near the pup's wrist, dark against the skin, almost the color of dirt. Not a full snare, more like the remnant of one, a stubborn thread. He glanced at Mara. She held his gaze for a long second, then looked back to the pup. "Nandi," Elias whispered, "we may have a fragment of wire, and something else, a tiny node, could be a chip." He felt the day narrow to this circle of shade, this mother, this pup, and the quiet choice waiting inside his hands. The pup tried to stand when Elias inched closer, then folded back into itself, panting softly. He settled onto one knee, keeping his shoulders low, and used the brim of his hat to cast a gentler light over the injured leg. The loop was there, a thin, abrasive thread pressed into the fur, and just beneath it, a bead no bigger than a dried seed. He lifted his empty hand first, letting Mara see it. Then, with 2 fingers, he slid the gauze toward the pup and waited. "Angle yourself left," Dr. Seifu advised over the radio, his voice warm with restraint. "Let the lioness read your intent. Work in the open." Elias shifted as told, moving like a man learning a hymn by heart. He took a small pair of shears from his pocket and placed them on the ground where Mara could see, then drew them forward an inch at a time. The lioness dipped her head, muscles strung tight, but her eyes never flashed. He heard Nandi in his earpiece, counting breath and distance as if steady words could hold the world together. "Drone up," Nandi said. "I'm painting a ring around you with markers on the screen. 4 heat signatures on the far ridge, spacing wide, likely a crew. You've got a short window, Eli." He pressed the gauze gently beneath the wire and clipped once, clean, like trimming the memory of a bad season. The pup flinched but did not cry out. He eased the loosened loop free, then turned his attention to the tiny bead set into the thread. It reflected a speck of sky. Some things were meant for tracking water in migration, others were not. "Can you remove it?" Dr. Seifu asked. "Not here," Elias said. "Not all of it." He wrapped the fragment in gauze and slipped it into a pouch, but I can keep it from telling strangers what they shouldn't know. Wind came across the grass in a long, even line and brought with it a distant pop that made the ground feel thinner. Elias glanced up. "Heard that?" Nandi said. "Single report. Might be a test shot or a scare. Juma likes noise." Elias steadied his breathing. He slid the canteen closer, cracked the cap to let the pup lick a rim of water, then drew back again to widen the space. Mara lowered her head until her whiskers brushed the pup's crown. Something like release moved through the shade. 15 minutes, tops, Nandi murmured. Then we shift you south. Elias wiped the dust from his palms and set the shears aside. "We'll make it count," he said to the radio, to the lioness, to the land itself. One careful thing at a time. By late afternoon, the light turned copper and the wind shifted, pushing scent and sound along the wash like a slow tide. Elias eased to his feet and looked back at the ground Hia and the little group had claimed. Drops the color of old brick dotted a pale stone and ran on in a thin path toward the south, a line anyone with hard eyes could follow. He pulled a rag from his pocket and dabbed the stone, smudging the trail until it looked like the dust around it. Small things, but sometimes small things mattered. "Eli," Nandi said, voice low in his ear, "crew on the ridge is widening their net. Heat marks at 4 points. They're patient." "Understood," he answered. "I'm moving us, slow and quiet." He shrugged out of his jacket and held it open a moment to catch the evening air, then tied it around his waist. The fabric carried his scent more than the others. He would let the land take that burden, not the pup. Mara watched everything, eyes measuring, tail still. He nodded to her as if they had agreed to this before either of them was born. They stepped in a staggered rhythm. Elias first to test the ground, then Mara, then the pup, Kito, hopping close to the lioness's shadow. Ahead lay a patch of scrub where the sand sloped down and the grass grew taller. Elias aimed for it, not to hide forever, only to break the sight line. A single sharp crack drifted in from the west. Not close, not far. The kind of sound that makes birds lift and settle again. Nandi's breath clicked in his earpiece. "They want you to hurry," she said softly. "Don't." Elias reached the truck he had parked under a thorn a quarter-mile back. He popped the worn hood and wiped a little grease on the outside of his jacket, then on a handful of grass, which he tossed into the wind. He wasn't trying to teach anyone a lesson, only to muddle the obvious so the trail would tell a gentler story. The radio hissed and then steadied. Dr. Seifu's voice came through, careful as always. "Remember, if you must stop, do it where the air moves. Let the night cover your noise." "Copy," Elias said. He glanced at Mara. The scar on her shoulder caught a coin of light and went dim again. Between them and the ridge, the land breathed in long, even lines. Behind them, the red dots on stone had thinned to nothing. Ahead, the scrub opened like a curtain, and for a moment the world felt almost kind. Then Nandi spoke again, and the tone in her voice polished the air to a blade. "Eli, one more thing. Someone's repeating our channel numbers. They may be listening." Elias chose a seam of shade where the scrub rose like low green surf and the air flowed in a steady stream. He knelt and, without drama, slid the rifle from his shoulder. He thumbed the safety on and set it behind him, well out of his own reach and easy for Mara to see. Then he unclipped the half-empty magazine from his vest and laid it beside the rifle as if to tell the land he planned to use other tools. The radio whispered with wind and wire. "Hold there," Nandi said, voice low. "You've got moving heat to your west. I'm pulling the drone higher." The feed fizzed, then went dark. Silence filled his ear the way dusk fills a room. He tapped the set once and heard nothing. Not broken, blanked. Someone had pressed a palm over the sky. He let the quiet be a teacher. He counted his breaths, slow, and matched them to the rise and fall of the grass. Mara stood 10 steps away, broad and still, her tail a slow metronome. Kito curled against a root, nose tucked, eyes half shut. Elias opened his canteen, wet a square of gauze, and placed it where the pup could reach without shifting weight. Water beaded. A pink tongue gathered it, patient as a sparrow at a feeder. Across the flats, a faint tremor passed through the earth. Too even for thunder, too gentle for a stampede. A truck turning far off, he guessed, or a generator coming awake. He didn't try to name it out loud. Names can make fear too loud to hear what matters. Dr. Seifu's voice returned in a ribbon. "Short outage, likely a pocket of interference," he said. "Use it to breathe. The pup's limb will swell with effort. Keep motion to the bare minimum." "I'm with you," Elias answered, but kept his volume at the level of thought. He eased a fresh bandage from its paper and tucked the wrapper away so it would not flutter and tell tales. Mara's ears cupped toward him, then relaxed. The air smelled of warm sap and old rain. Seconds stretched long enough for memory to take a seat beside him. He saw the cub he'd been late for, the way night had closed over that small shape like a door. He didn't push the image away this time. He let it sit. Across from him, a mother guarded a child that wasn't hers, because the day had asked her to. The lesson was simple and difficult in equal measure. The drone returned with a soft hum in his ear. "Back online," Nandi said. "They're probing but not closing. Hold the stillness as long as you can." Elias folded his hands on his knees. The sun leaned west. In the hush between heartbeats, he felt the land test him and, just for a breath, accept his answer. The light thinned to honey and glass as Elias shifted to ease the pressure off his knees. Mara turned slightly, and the old scar on her shoulder caught the sunset, an arc of pale skin like a thin moon laid against tawny fur. He knew that mark. Years ago, he had logged it in a notebook, a quiet detail that helped him tell one lioness from another. It had belonged to a mother who lost a cub on a night he still carried like a stone in his pocket. He did not look away. Memory tried to lift its voice, but he let the moment stay present and simple. A mother, a pup, the wind moving the grass. Mara studied him in return, her gaze steady, not a challenge so much as a question. "What have you learned since then?" The radio clicked with a soft, borrowed rhythm. A new voice slid onto the channel, young and tight at the edges. "South run. Repeat, south run," it said, as if quoting coordinates from somewhere else. Nandi's answer came on a different cadence, cautious. "Identify." Static held for a beat. Then the same young voice again, lower now, as if trying to be two people at once. "Confirming traffic. Copy drift to the south. Over." Elias scanned the ridge through the grass. Small figures moved in a loose line, then hesitated, then turned. Not closing, angling away. He didn't celebrate. The bush taught him early that luck wears many faces. "Eli," Nandi said, barely above a whisper, "we've got an odd split. One of them keeps pausing, like he's not sure of his feet." Dr. Seifu came on next. "If they're repeating our numbers, someone has hands on their dial, or a conscience." The pup stirred and nosed the damp edge of gauze. Mara lowered her head until her whiskers brushed its ear. Elias set the empty canteen down beside his boot, so the sound of metal would not carry. The evening air cooled. Birds stitched quick lines across the high blue. He listened again. The young voice returned in a brief burst, almost a breath. "Hold north." Then silence. A choice had been made somewhere he could not see. Elias let his shoulders ease, not from relief, but from clarity. He looked at Mara and spoke quietly, more to himself than to her. "We're not the only ones changing shape." The land answered with nothing more than the hush of wind through thorns. That was enough. He checked the angle of light, measured the shadows growing long, and began to plan for a night that would ask for careful steps and steady hearts. Dusk thinned the heat to something he could carry. Elias shrugged out of his jacket and shook it once to lift his scent, then rolled it tight with a cloth pouch he'd used to blot Kito's blood. He tied the bundle to a length of cord and dragged it along a shallow arc south, a wandering trail that would read as haste to anyone greedy for conclusions. When he reached a low rise, he hooked the cord over a thorn and let the jacket sway like a tired flag. "I'm with you," Nandi said softly in his ear, authorizing the scent kit. A moment later, her drone purred over the scrub and misted a legal decoy, synthetic, harmless, but persuasive enough to stitch his trail into something louder. "This buys minutes, not miracles," she added. "Minutes will do," he answered. He returned to Mara and the pup, keeping his steps slow so the grass could close behind him. Kito lifted his head, eyes bright. but rimmed with fatigue. Mara's ears tracked Elias, then flicked toward the ridge where the last of the sun laid bronze on stone. The plane felt paused between breaths. Far off, a truck door slammed. Then voices, thinned by distance, drifted like birds you couldn't quite name. The line of men on the ridge broke into two groups. One angled toward the false trail, heads down, urgent. The other hesitated, then turned as if pulled by a second thought. "Split confirmed," Nandi whispered. "Your decoy is working. One of them keeps checking his flank." Elias eased the canteen near Kito and watched the pup lap, careful not to tip weight onto the sore foreleg. He kept the radio low. "If they turn back, I'll lift the jacket and lead farther south." Before Nandi could reply, a dry, rolling croak lifted from behind them. Vultures. They had settled earlier on a carcass across the wash, but Mara gave a sudden, short roar, more command than challenge, and the birds rose in a rush that churned the air and threw a black veil over the men's sight lines. Dust blossomed, shouts tangled. A shot cracked, then another, ragged and hurried. No impact near them, no spray of stone, only the clatter of confusion. The young voice from earlier bled through the static. "Hold north, tire, check tire," it said, then cut away. Nandi didn't celebrate. She marked time. "Delay on their side." She murmured. "Something mechanical, maybe a puncture." Elias looked at Mara. "Thank you," he said, not expecting understanding, only balance. He lifted the jacket cord once more and set a longer arc to the south, then returned to the scrub and knelt. The land waited. Night gathered its edges. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a choice had been made, not just his. Night arrived one careful shade at a time, laying soft blue over the scrub and turning the plain to a quiet sea. Elias waited until the wind settled into a steady lane, then moved back to Mara and the pup with the calm of a man walking into a chapel. He knelt, keeping his shoulders lower than her gaze, and set a small canvas roll on the ground. Inside lay the fine pliers he saved for thorns and bad wire, the tools for work that asked for gentle hands. Kito watched him with that bright, weary courage young things carry. The loop Elias had clipped earlier hung loose, but a tiny node still nested in the frayed thread, a stubborn eye that wanted to see too much. "Easy," he murmured, not as a command, but as a promise. He slid the pliers under the bead, lifted a fraction, and turned. The piece came away like a burr at last letting go. He wrapped it in gauze and closed his fist around it until his knuckles cooled. Mara shifted once, not toward him, but toward Kito, as if to place her strength where it belonged. Elias rose and walked a few paces to an acacia grown out of the hardpan like a patient hand. He dug a narrow slot with his knife and pressed the wrapped bead deep into the earth. From his pocket, he took the small brass shell he had kept for years, a token of a night he would not repeat, and set it beside the gauze. Sand covered both, simple as a blessing. The radio breathed, then found its voice. "You clear?" Nandi asked, a smile hidden under the steadiness. "Clear," he said. "Trail's quiet." Another tone followed, Dr. Seifu, gentle as always. "Sometimes forgiveness doesn't speak. It just waits to see if we've learned." Elias turned back. Mara stood broad against the night, and Kito leaned into her shadow. Out across the flats, a long, thin call rose and fell, answered by another, farther still. Not lions. A pack's distant roll, like water on stone. The pup lifted its head, ears tall. From the dark behind him, a small click sounded at his feet. He looked down to find a compact rescue beacon, new, clean, unclaimed. No footprints close enough to trust, only the message it carried. Someone on the ridge had chosen a different road. Elias backed away, giving the night back to those who needed it more. Mara turned without drama and led Kito into the grass, disappearing the way good mercy does, quietly, with purpose. He listened until their sound became part of the wind, then shouldered his pack and walked toward morning. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.